It is a Tuesday morning in a typical American office or perhaps a crowded coffee shop in the heart of a busy city. The air is thick with the sound of mechanical keyboards, the hum of the air conditioner, and the rehearsed cadence of small talk. Most people are moving through their day on autopilot, focused on their next meeting or their next meal. But for some, the environment is processed through a much sharper lens. You might notice someone sitting in the corner, their eyes scanning the room with a quiet, intense focus. They aren't just looking, they are cataloging. They notice the slight tremor in a colleague's hand as they present a slideshow. They pick up on the forced pitch of a supervisor's laugh. They see the tiny inconsistencies between what a person says and how they carry their shoulders. In our culture, we often have a quick label for this behavior. We call it being judgmental. We assume it comes from a place of arrogance or a desire to feel superior by tearing others down. The social script tells us that judging is a character flaw, a sign of a cold heart or a cynical mind. We are taught from a young age that if we don't have something nice to say, we shouldn't say anything at all. But for the person behind those observant eyes, the internal reality is rarely about malice. It isn't about being better than anyone else. Instead, it often feels like an involuntary survival mechanism. It is as if they were born with a high-definition radar that cannot be turned off. While others see a simple social interaction, they see a complex map of hidden motives, unspoken tensions, and emotional gaps. For many, this constant assessment isn't a choice. It's how they navigate a world that feels loud, unpredictable, and sometimes deeply insincere. They are hyper-aware of the mask because they are intimately familiar with the effort it takes to wear one. The judgment isn't an attack on others. It is a way of trying to find a safe place to stand in a landscape that feels increasingly performative. There is a specific neurological intensity to this way of being. In the context of modern psychology, we might look at this as a form of hyper-vigilance or an extreme sensitivity to social stimuli. While the average person filters out 90% of the nonverbal cues they encounter, the judgmental mind processes almost all of them. This isn't just an intellectual exercise, it is a sensory experience. For some, this stems from a high degree of pattern recognition. They see the world in sequences and symmetries. When a person's behavior deviates from their stated values, it creates a kind of cognitive dissonance for the observer. It feels like a note played out of tune in an otherwise perfect symphony. This sensitivity is often found in those who fall under the umbrella of neurodivergence, individuals whose brains are wired to prioritize accuracy and detail over social cohesion. In a fast-paced American culture that prizes faking it until you make it, this need for accuracy can be exhausting. To the observer, the hustle often looks like a series of contradictions. They see the exhaustion behind the grind and the insecurity behind the boss persona. Because they can see through the performance so clearly, they find it difficult to participate in it. The internal world of the observer is often much heavier than it appears from the outside. There is a common assumption that the person judging is enjoying their vantage point, sitting comfortably in a seat of power. In reality, being unable to turn off the analytical mind often leads to a profound sense of isolation. It is difficult to feel part of the group when you are constantly aware of the group's underlying mechanics. Instead of feeling superior, many of these individuals feel burdened by the truth of what they see. They are hyper-aware of the flaws in others because they are equally, if not more hyper-aware of the flaws in themselves. The judgment they project outward is often just the overflow of an internal environment that demands perfection, logic, and absolute transparency. In a world that is rarely any of those things, to understand the judgmental mind, we have to look at the invisible walls it builds. In a society that often feels competitive and demanding, judgment frequently acts as a sophisticated form of emotional armor. It is a way of creating distance before someone else can get too close. By identifying the weaknesses or inconsistencies in others, the observer creates a map of potential threats. It is a preemptive strike of the mind meant to ensure that they are never caught off guard. This tendency often traces back to an environment where being right was the only way to be safe. Perhaps there was a childhood where the emotional climate was unpredictable, or a professional history where one mistake led to a total loss of status. In these spaces, the ability to accurately assess the character and motives of those around you becomes a vital skill. It is the difference between being blindsided and being prepared. Some researchers suggest that this high-level discernment is actually a byproduct of a deeply empathetic system that has been overloaded. Because the observer feels the shifts in the room so acutely, they must categorize them quickly to keep from being overwhelmed. They are not looking for reasons to dislike people. They are looking for reasons to trust them. The sharp edge of their judgment is often just the searching tip of a very sensitive soul. There is also a quiet, unrecognized strength in this perspective. These are the people who notice when a system is failing before it collapses. They are the ones who can sense the burnout in a teammate long before the person admits it to themselves. While the world calls it judgment, it could also be described as a deep commitment to the truth. They value what is real over what is comfortable, and in a landscape of endless mirrors and marketing, that commitment is rare. The struggle, of course, is that the truth can be a lonely place to live. When you see the world as it is rather than how it presents itself, you often find yourself standing on the outside of the circle. The very tools used to find safety, the analysis, the skepticism, the high standards can eventually become the bars of a cage. The observer is safe, but they are often very much alone. Accepting this part of the self requires a shift in perspective. It involves moving away from the idea that a critical mind is a broken mind. There is a tendency to believe that to be a good person, one must be entirely uncritical, accepting every situation and every person with a blank smiling face. But for the observer, that isn't just difficult. It is a betrayal of their natural intelligence. The goal is not to stop seeing the patterns or to go blind to the inconsistencies of the world. Instead, it is about recognizing that this sharp perception is a tool, not an identity. It is possible to notice the mask without resenting the person who wears it. There is a quiet peace that comes when one realizes that most people are not trying to be deceptive. They are simply trying to survive their own fears and their own pressures. When the observer begins to apply the same high-definition lens to their own need for safety, the judgment often softens into a form of profound insight. They start to see that the flaws they find in others are often the very things they fear in themselves. This realization doesn't make them less observant, but it does make them more human. The distance between us and them begins to shrink, replaced by a shared understanding of the human struggle. There is a unique power in being the one who sees. In a world that often moves too fast to notice the details, the person who pauses to analyze brings a necessary balance. They are the guardians of authenticity. Their presence reminds us that it is okay to look deeper, to ask questions, and to value the truth over the performance. You are not cold for seeing the world clearly. You are not broken for noticing the things that others miss. You are simply a witness to the complexity of life. By accepting this intensity, the need to judge begins to transform into a quiet form of wisdom. The sharp edges remain, but they are no longer used to cut. They are used to define a life lived with clarity and a heart that seeks what is real.